in that Warriors locker room. I don't know why I'm blanking on what game that was. Who
It
did
was
they?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. They beat Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Klay for how many times as far as him not closing? Was it
This
two of
is
the previous three?
2 out of the last 3, and really it would have been 3 of 3 because he didn't close with Klay in the first half in Atlanta, but then Andrew Wiggins hurt his foot, so they did close with him down the stretch. But Steve Kerr's clearly trending this direction. It's 3 in a row, and then the one that people forget, the first one that really ever he didn't he went away from Klay Thompson in crunch time was in Phoenix back in December, the same night that Draymond hit Nurkic. And Klay gave a pretty similar post-game interview in the locker room that night about just like the challenges of it. And honestly, was more upset that night. He was like brooding around on the bench. He hit a cup rack over. He was kind of yelling towards the direction of the coaches when they benched him that night because it was the first time he'd ever dealt with it. But nobody talked about it post-game because Draymond was on his way to an indefinite suspension from something else that happened that night. So it's something he's been dealing with really from then, this kind of trend away. And I mean, you mentioned it. I think you're more talking about just it seems like it was stark to a lot of people to see, an athlete who is open and transparent, by the way, typically in his interviews, dealing with, kind of career mortality. I mean, he's still got years left in the league, but dealing with just fading from being a guaranteed closing option because he's a star in the league, and he's just not that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the vulnerability is what jumped out, I think, to people. And to be honest, I mean, the internet sucks in general, just if we're being honest. So, I see vulnerability. A lot of people saw, acted like it was sad. And our Marcus Thompson wrote a great column about Klay and basically kind of checked that idea that it was sad. He talked about other athletes who have had, much, much tougher declines. My favorite reference was him talking about Jose Canseco batting 142 in the minor leagues, when he was still trying to hang on. Klay's not there by any means. He's just not having a Klay level season. The other part that I honestly loved is that because you talk to Klay in the locker room, whereas you guys know, we continue to fight for access to be in the locker room and to get these kinds of raw moments because that is where these guys live and kind of where they breathe professionally. Klay's choice to be honest, as you and I don't know how many people were there, but Tim Bontemps from ESPN was right next to you. It's just, you got the real perspective from Klay, and then you even had stuff on the side. I chuckled like I think a lot of people when Draymond chimes in and says,
I can set up the scene for you if you want.
Yeah,
and we can start in Atlanta a couple nights before because he goes 4-19 in the Atlanta game. And I mentioned earlier he probably wouldn't have closed if Andrew Wiggins was available, but he did close, and he was not good down the stretch. He missed, 3 shots in overtime, and his jumper was way off, and he was pretty despondent about his performance, right? I mean, he was probably the reason they lost the game that Steph Curry scored 60 points. You guys probably remember. And I tried to get him in the locker room that night, and I got one question in, and he's like, I'm just going to go see my family. He just did not want to talk, and he kind of bolted from the locker room. And again, he's not going to the podium because he's, the Warriors typically who is the stars of the game will go to the podium. They don't, put the guy that went 4-19, even though it's the bigger story. Even though no Andrew Wiggins in Brooklyn, Steve Kerr just says, forget about it. I'm closing with Guy Santos, which made the story even more wild because this was a guy who, honestly, the NBA community probably had never even heard of him.
Slater. I looked at the TV and literally was like, who the hell is that guy in the Warriors jersey?
Yeah. Hustling too, and Steve Kerr was just fist pumping. He compared him to
they let a fan come play for the night. I didn't know who.
He was running back in transition defense, and if a fan was doing that, Steve Kerr was putting him in the lineup. So that part was stark, obviously. And then we kind of get in the locker room, and I know Klay's not going to the podium again, and he hadn't even gone to the shower yet. He's still sitting there, kind of, in the warm up or whatever you want to call it. And I was like, Klay, can I get you for a couple minutes? And he just turned and went, I'm an open book, buddy. I'm an open book. And I was like, all right, cool. So, and then I think, other reporters saw Klay's about to basically hold a willing presser over here, whatever you want to call it, scrum. So I don't know, 4 or 5 of us maybe crowded around. And I mean, people saw the video. It was weird because Klay clearly is willing to really kind of go down a little bit of a vulnerable road. I hadn't even gotten to the questions about getting benched yet. I was more starting with the struggles he was under. But Draymond walks out of the shower singing. I didn't even know that's what he was singing, but it was this Oliver Twist show tune. I'm sure we were in New York. I'm sure he saw it the night before or something like that. But he's la da da. They just won. That's the thing. Like he's
Fred,
spinning
we
out.
got Slater singing on the pod. Can we get a few more bars, please? That
Yes,
wasn't enough. Yeah.
anything or something. I don't know. People can watch the video. But he turns the corner and he sees we're crowding Klay Thompson. He knows what the story is, and the way I read it, he really wanted to turn the temperature down. Like, hey, this doesn't matter as much. Like, why is the story of the night have to
Oh
be
yeah.
Klay Thompson
Yeah,
not getting benched? They won. I think that's what he's trying to do. And you guys can hear him basically be like, I got benched in game 5 of the finals. Who the F cares? But my point to him at the time, and the thing is, like, the press conference or whatever, the scrum stops for a second, and then I start talking to Draymond, and I'm like, I haven't even asked him that yet.
That was my
Like,
favordt part.
yeah, and he's like, well, you're gonna. I know you're gonna. And I'm
No,
like,
you
you know what?
said
I am
I
gonna.
haven't even asked that yet, but I guess I will now.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, well, you were gonna.
You look like you were gonna.
Yeah, and it was just that was stark. And then he, by the way, keeps singing Oliver Twist as Clay's going through this thing.
That's why we gotta have locker room. That's locker room, baby. That's great.
No, I agree with you. That access I've always thought is better. I wish there was more scrums now. But yeah, I mean, all that to say, I mean, this is just like the place that not only Klay Thompson's in, but right, doesn't he kind of represent what the dynasty's in right now? Right, they leaped ahead of the Rockets yesterday to get into 11th in the West, and I think a lot of people are kind of like wondering, like, are they the team of the deadline? Can they, rattle the league with some big move to, like, resurrect a dynasty that seems to be fading? And, like, answer's probably no, very likely no. They're stuck with some of these contracts. They're going to try to chase down a play-in and probably have to try to play their way in through the play-in and make any noise. But they got a lot of, honestly, the best part of their season, at least internally, is like the growth of the young guys. And it's Kuminga's rise, as you mentioned. Moses Moody's had some moments. They've had these weirder, situations like the Guy Santos one you mentioned the other night, and like that to me is more important for the franchise over the next couple months. Is like building up some of the youth so they're either better rotation players next season or better assets to go get Steph Curry older help this summer. But I don't expect Klay Thompson to be moved. We can get into why, but yeah.
I was going to say, just to make sure we give the people what they want here on trade deadline week, give us a breakdown on the Klay and why he won't be moved.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's $43 million expiring, which is two reasons that important. Number one, that's like hard to get to, right? You have to like go find $43 million of like aggregatable contracts that you think is like will help within the rotation. And by the way, another team is not like beating down their doors to try to get Klay, so the offers are not even very good anyways. And it's valuable to the Warriors, the $43 million expiring, by the way, because like they're trying to get under the second apron this summer, and getting Klay either from 43 down to 20 if he comes back, or 43 down to 0 if he doesn't come back, is huge for the duck in the apron. And then the other thing is like it is Klay Thompson. Like, he's going to have a statue out in front of Chase Center. Sam, you're around, like, what he is locally, just as a legend. And maybe you need to be a little bit more cold-blooded in business, but I just get the sense from the Warriors that there's no desire to make a move that's really not going to move the needle that much anyways, to get a little bit better within their rotation by chopping off the head of a statue guy.
Well, especially in midseason, right? That to me, the important distinction. It's funny, yesterday, friend and colleague Om Youngmasuk had a good piece on ESPN about what it's like for players to get traded midseason. All kinds of anecdotes about, okay, yes, they make a ton of money, but there's a real life component. Their families are uprooted, school systems for their kids, sneakers, clothes, all these different things. Like, midseason trades are not real enjoyable for the player. To do that to Klay and have him going from a Warriors jersey to something else.
They would be tapping him on the shoulder in an Indianapolis hotel tomorrow and telling Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Steve Kerr this, like, Klay's gone.
As opposed to, like, let's say, hypothetically, not reporting, but like, let's say this summer they sign a trade scenario, something like that. Like, you can say, all right, when are we going to go to Klay's house to sit on his couch and show him respect?